There's a version of your life you've been waiting for. Not the one you're living, the one that starts when things finally change, when the right person shows up, when someone finally sees how hard you've been trying, when a mentor reaches out, when a friend calls first, when the universe sends a sign so clear you can't ignore it. You've been waiting for a long time now. Maybe you don't call it waiting. Maybe you call it hope. Maybe you call it faith. Maybe you've dressed it up in the language of patience, telling yourself that good things come to those who wait. But underneath all of it, there is a quiet, uncomfortable truth you've been circling for years. Nobody is coming, not in the way you imagined, not the way it happens in the stories, in the moment you truly realize that, not just intellectually, but in your chest, is one of the most disorienting moments a person can experience. Because it doesn't just feel like disappointment, it feels like abandonment. Think about the people you've waited for in your life. Maybe it was a parent who was supposed to show up differently, who was supposed to protect you, guide you, see you, and didn't. Maybe it was a partner, someone who was supposed to choose you fully, not halfway, not conditionally, not when it was convenient for them. Maybe it was a friend, someone you poured yourself into, only to realize the pouring was never going to be returned. Or maybe it wasn't a person at all. Maybe you've been waiting for a feeling, the feeling that you're finally ready, that you finally know enough, have enough, are enough to start living the life you actually want. We are all in some way waiting rooms, filled with hope that something outside us will arrive and reorganize everything. And the longer we wait, the more sophisticated our waiting becomes. We stop calling it waiting. We call it planning. We call it being realistic. We call it not wanting to get hurt again. But it's still waiting. And somewhere beneath the surface, you already know the thing nobody wants to say out loud. The rescue isn't coming. Here's what makes this realization so painful. It's not just that help isn't coming. It's that you believed it was. You built your life around a promise nobody actually made. The world didn't lie to you exactly. But it allowed you to believe something. Through the stories you consumed, through the relationships you watched, through the moments when help did arrive, just enough to keep the hope alive. And so when the realization finally lands, when you see clearly that no one is going to save you, it doesn't just feel like a loss. It feels like a betrayal. Like something was taken from you that you never actually had. That grief is real. You don't have to pretend it isn't. The anger is real. The confusion is real. And the silence that follows, that long, hollow silence after the hope runs out. That is perhaps the most honest moment you will ever experience. Because in that silence, something is being stripped away. And what's being stripped away is the story you told yourself about how your life was going to work. There was a man born in 1913 in a small apartment in Algeria. His father died before he was 1 year old, killed in a war that had nothing to do with him, in a country that didn't know his name. His mother was nearly deaf. She couldn't really speak to him. She sat in silence in a small room, and he grew up watching her. This quiet woman who couldn't give him the words he needed, surrounded by a world that offered no explanation for why his life had started this way. His name was Albert Camus, and he would grow up to become one of the most important writers of the 20th century. But before he became a philosopher, before he won the Nobel Prize, before the world knew who he was a child who learned very early that the universe does not organize itself around your pain. Nobody came for Camus either. No rescue, no explanation, no cosmic justice that arrived and made sense of the loss. The world was simply silent, indifferent, and Camus sat with that silence long enough to understand something most people spend their whole lives avoiding. The world owes you nothing. Not because it hates you, but because it was never personal. He called this the absurd. The collision between a human being who desperately needs meaning and a universe that offers none in return. But here is where Camus diverges from every comfortable philosopher who came before him. He didn't say, therefore despair. He said, therefore live. There is a moment in Camus' most famous work, The Myth of Sisyphus, where he describes a man condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. Every time Sisyphus reaches the top, the boulder rolls back down, and he must descend and begin again. Camus asks, must we imagine Sisyphus unhappy? And his answer is no. Not because the task becomes easier, not because the gods relent, not because someone arrives to help him carry the weight, but because Sisyphus owns the struggle. He has stopped waiting for the gods to change the sentence. He has stopped looking to the sky for rescue. He has turned back toward the boulder with something that looks almost like defiance. And in that turning, he becomes free. This is what Camus understood that most people never fully grasp. Freedom doesn't come from rescue. It comes from the moment you stop needing it. When you stop waiting for someone to choose you and start choosing yourself. When you stop waiting for permission and start moving. When you stop waiting for the world to become fair and start building something true inside an unfair world. Something shifts. The abandonment you felt begins to transform into something else. Not comfort, not immediate peace, but ownership. The realization that your life, this specific life, with all its weight, belongs entirely to you. Nobody else is going to live it. Nobody else can. And that truth, which first arrived as grief, can become, if you let it, the most clarifying force you've ever encountered. Here is what changes when you truly stop waiting. You stop measuring your life against the version you were hoping someone else would help you build. You stop performing for an audience that was never going to give you what you needed anyway. You stop editing yourself down to make it easier for people to stay. You start making decisions from a different place, not from fear that no one will come if you fail, but from the understanding that you will be there when you get back up. Camus wrote that the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. That's what this realization makes possible. Not the rebellion of bitterness, not the rebellion of someone who was hurt and wants the world to know it, but the quiet, steady rebellion of a person who looked at the silence, understood it was never going to answer, and decided to speak anyway, to build anyway, to love anyway, to live fully, honestly, without the safety net of rescue anyway. The moment you realize nobody is coming is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of the only version of your story that was ever really yours. The waiting had a purpose. It kept you safe while you were building the strength you didn't yet know you had. But you've been building for a while now, and the boulder is there, and the hill is real, and no one is coming to carry it for you. But here's what Camus knew, and what you already know, somewhere beneath all the waiting. You are stronger than you think. Not because life got easier, but because you're still here, still watching, still thinking, still asking questions that most people are too afraid to ask. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of something. So descend the hill, pick up the boulder, and this time, don't wait for permission to begin.